So one of the most significant things that are going to impact the Browns season, or at least the ceiling of their season, is the whole Deshaun Watson suspension that's looming over the Cleveland Browns right now. Now, there's been some more information to go out about it, so we're going to watch a video and read a couple articles to see what the updates are and what's the significance of these updates and what does that mean for how long he might be suspended this year.
Back to Davion Clowney to line up across from Myles Garrett on that D-line. Check out why Clowney decided to return to the land.
I was all about where my boy Deshaun was going. When I talked to him, I said I played with him, and he kept us off the field a lot. And I was like, wherever you go, I know you're going to keep us off the field. You put up a lot of points. And I just wanted to go play with him and see what I can do with him again.
Hold on, wait.
Clowney and Watson spent 2 seasons together, of course.
Oh, wait. So, interesting thing about that clip, right? I believe after that, to be fair, he said he liked Baker and Baker's cool and all that, but, he just wanted to play with Deshaun Watson. But Clowney's very transparent. It's not a mystery. I know some people like to act like it's a mystery, but, I mean, if you dig just a little bit, not even deep, if you just dig a little bit, the defense was not happy with the play of the offense last year. They were very frustrated and felt like the offense let them down tremendously, and chief among the letdowners, right? Because they're not looking at Nick Chubb like that. They're not looking at Kareem Hunt like that. They're not looking at the offensive line like that. They're looking at Baker Mayfield. And from their support about Odell Beckham, it was about Baker Mayfield. They were not happy with the play of Baker Mayfield. And, it's Jadeveon Clowney said it as clear as day. He was not coming back unless he was secure in what the quarterback play would be. And what that meant is that the quarterback was going to be different. Not meaning he got a personal beef with Baker Mayfield, but he do got a business beef with Baker, because if you're a defensive player, your team's not winning, nobody's paying attention, and that's going to cost you money. That just is the reality of that whole situation. I'm pretty sure it ain't nothing personal, but I know people try to act like these things don't exist, so when the evidence is clear in the face, you got to just point it out sometimes. All right, let's get back to the video. Now, Matt's point, I'm going to kind of skip over because he's just talking about the locker room reaction. We've been through all of that. We know that locker rooms are diverse, in opinion in the NFL, especially because there's just so many people in the NFL locker room. So he's just basically saying that, it's not going to be just one thought in the NFL locker room. But this is where it gets interesting. He's going to come in here with more of a report.
Well, Max, I just checked in on this, and I was told that there is no conclusion imminent from the league office, that they're still working on this, but the hope is to wrap this up by training camp, come to a decision by then. Not a slam dunk that happens, but that's sort of the loose goal. So it could be any time in the next few weeks. And I asked around about the notion that the league is worried about coming to a conclusion too soon, knowing this case could still drag out, more details could come about. And I was reaffirmed that the league has been working on this investigation for 18 months. It feels pretty good that it has all the knowledge, for the most part, that it needs, and so it could come to a conclusion. It could also amend a suspension length later on if new details come about. And so for all those reasons, it would be a mild surprise if he was in the lineup week 1. Teams I had talked to even months ago, before we got more details, we're budgeting.
All right, so one thing that's interesting there to talk about adding more games with more details arise. Obviously, if new things pop up, that's going to factor into how long Deshaun Watson's going to be out. We'll see how many of these new things can, one, pop up, and two, be substantiated in some way that the NFL will feel like it needs to be act on. We'll see what happens there. Also, there was this ideal that the NFL was going to wait until the civil cases were over to do any suspension. That's clearly out the window. The NFL is going to act on what they know now, and that's what they're going to base the suspension
for like 6 to 8 games that Watson could miss this year, and it could be longer than that.
Thanks, Scott.
But interestingly enough, despite everything that you hear on the internet the last few days, most people who are close to this situation are still thinking 6 to 8 games is the probable suspension length. And I think that's even what the Cleveland Browns are thinking is the probable suspension length. Now, this report came out from the Washington Post earlier. I think this was actually today. And the headline of it is the league will probably seek a significant suspension of Deshaun Watson. Now, this is no news. We knew that the Deshaun Watson suspension would not be an insignificant one, right? There was some hopes that it would be a 4-game suspension, but it's going to be significant. Now, the word significant isn't automatic for a year suspension for what the league will argue for. And again, the wording here is important. The NFL will argue for a significant suspension of Deshaun Watson. It's not saying the NFL will likely put down an unprecedented suspension, right? That's the word that would be trouble if you're the Cleveland Browns, if this were unprecedented, because that means that this is going to be more than a year or a year, right? But significant can be 8 to 10 games, right? And they go on here to point out, the NFL is looking to seek a significant suspension. The league will probably, and these words are in quotes, so these are quotes from whatever source that this article has, probably want to do that, but they're also going to be careful in how they seek out the suspension. But significant would be the proper term for the suspension. Keep in mind, again, I'm not just saying that the writer chose significant. This is what the league office is saying is significant. Significant does not mean what I think a lot of people assume it means. It means it's going to be a lengthy suspension. That does not mean it's going to be an unprecedented suspension, because if the league thought they were going to do something like that, I think they would be more comfortable with their language here, right? The fact that they're purposely saying more cautious language around this suspension means that they kind of expect pushback from the NFLPA, or they're currently in some kind of talks with how they're going to make this suspension go down in a way that it does not need a massive appeal that's going to bring in other team owners into that. Now, that point will be carried out in just a minute. But again, if we scroll down here and you read the whole article, again, you could read it for free on the Washington Post if that's what you want to do. And at the end of the article, it's probably something very interesting, right? I'm going to read this last section here. You can read along with me if you want to. The league ideally would like to have this entire process, including the resolution of any appeal, completed by the start of training camp. A person familiar with the NFL view said, adding the disclaimer that the approach taken by Kessler and the NFLPA could slow the proceedings. So the NFL's goal is to have this suspension out before the start of camp. Now, if you weren't around during the Josh Gordon saga of suspensions that he got throughout his career, this sounds very familiar, right? Oh, the league's going to have the suspension out a week before training camp. Oh, the league's going to let us know during OTAs. Oh, the league's going to let us know before the first preseason. Oh, the league's and these suspensions notoriously come in late from the NFL. They always do. So don't have your heart set on knowing what's going to happen with this suspension before training camp, because it's highly unlikely. This timeline is highly unlikely that it happens before the start of training camp. That's what they're hoping for. I don't know. I've been around the block with NFL suspensions and following them. It's never how it goes. We'll see. Maybe this will be the first one, but it's usually never the timeline that they put out there, right? The first case being resolved this is the first case being resolved. The Washington Post article continues on to say this is a new disciplinary system for a high-profile matter. A person on Watson's side wondered whether Goodell might be reluctant to overturn the neutral arbiter's disciplinary ruling in the first case. The league and the NFLPA could reach a settlement at some point to preclude any appeal or further legal action by Watson. Interesting, right? Interesting. The league and the NFLPA could reach a settlement at some point. Now, I don't know what the labor union laws are by heart. Now, I know that it's probably not legal for the NFLPA to individually barter out a suspension in bare terms for one player. I don't think that's legal for them to do, but I do know that it is the NFLPA's job to defend any member of its union from any disciplinary action by the NFL. That is their purpose, right? We see this all the time with unions. So, and this is part of the reason why it's good to have a union, is because you have that protection in case you get wrongfully fired. But this is what the NFLPA's job's going to be to do here, right? They're going to try to make sure that Watson gets the lowest penalty that they can get him. Now, they're not his lawyer. That's an important distinction to make. The NFLPA is not his lawyer, and any further legal action from this suspension would come from Deshaun Watson's lawyers. He would have to do that independently, much like Tom Brady independently sued and went to arbitration with the league over the Deflategate scandal, right? So I think a lot of people are reading this as the NFLPA is going to become Deshaun Watson's lawyers and get this suspension down. But what the NFLPA is going to do is work with the NFL to come to a conclusion on what they feel like the proper suspension is going to be for something like Watson, right? Something like this case with Deshaun Watson. What precedent is going to be set under this new CBA? It would preclude the NFL to include the NFLPA in these negotiations, or not negotiations, but in this, I don't know what you would call it, in this conversation about what the suspension would be, given that the NFLPA also has an attack on its hand to go after the NFL if the NFL rules in a way that they feel like is not what they want for future players under this collective bargaining agreement. Remember, the NFL not only has a duty to protect Deshaun Watson, they have a duty to protect every other player that is covered under the collective bargaining agreement, which is the entirety of the NFL Players Association, which means that this is not just a battle for the NFLPA over Deshaun Watson. This is a battle over anybody who ever is in a similar situation to Deshaun Watson. And not all situations are built equally. With the Deshaun Watson situation, I mean, it's a rather, there's a rather diverse amount of opinion on this whole situation, right? But 24 lawsuits is one thing. But they can't go and say, hey, go full force on Deshaun Watson on this case, because giving the NFL power to just go full go at any player would mean that they can go it for any situation that's even remotely smells like this Deshaun Watson one. If you're the NFLPA, you can't give the league that much power. You have to fight back on this. Now, how is the NFLPA planning to fight back on this, right? Well, their defense is going to take aim at the treatment of multiple owners in the NFL who have been caught up with what you can deem similar situations. Are they an analog? Are they perfectly the same? No, there are definitely differences in these cases, but there are similarities in there, and there were no punishments for Robert Kraft and his whole scandal, and his massage parlor scandal, and more insidiously, the Daniel Snyder and Jerry Jones scandal. Now, Jerry Jones isn't the one who's implicated in that scandal. It's one of his long-term associates and employees of the Cowboys that was kind of implicated in being a peeping Tom. And then similarly with Daniel Snyder, I mean, if you have not looked into what Daniel Snyder and those emails have revealed about what was going on with the Washington football team at that time, it's egregious what was going on in there, the same way the Jerry Jones situation is, and the Robert Kraft situation is. So the union will argue that his punishment in the light of potential findings and the recommendation of Beth Wilkinson was weak and not fully enforced. As to Kraft, the union will, and this is to Snyder, right? That first sentence. As to Kraft, the union will argue that Kraft received no punishment despite allegedly receiving a massage that became a sexual encounter. Allegedly receiving a massage that became a sexual encounter. Although Kraft was charged with solicitation, the case was dismissed based on the fact of video surveillance utilized by law enforcement violated the rights of the various persons who were securely recorded. So the reason Robert Kraft got off on that charge, I did not mean a pun in that way, was not because they didn't feel like Robert Kraft was indeed guilty of what they charged him of, but the way that they found out he was guilty was illegal. So they had to throw the evidence out, which got Robert Kraft out of there. And as to Jones, the union will argue the league failed to investigate the voyeurism scandal involving former Cowboys PR Rich Dalrymple, including not limited to key questions about what Jones knew, when he knew it, and whether he knew that Dalrymple was secretly recording multiple cheerleaders while they changed their clothes. The union believes that these arguments are more likely to find traction in the past, given that in 2020 of a new independent process assessing the potential personal conduct policy violations committed by a player with Roger Goodell or his designee no longer presiding over the effort to evaluate evidence and reach a decision. The disciplinary officer, Judge Sue Robinson, could decide to allow the union to fully explore the manner in which the league handled Snyder, Kraft, and Jones. So the reason the league wants to avoid this argument from the NFLPA is because it is likely that if the NFLPA brings up this argument, that the arbiter, the judge in this case, is going to find it a fair question to ask on why investigations and further punishment were not pursued in these cases. The owners, who are in the collective bargaining agreement and covered under the collective bargaining agreement, by the way. We just don't think about it like that because they are the owners and it's hard to suspend them because they're not going to suspend themselves. And what the threat of that isn't that the owners are going to get suspended, right? The threat of that is that they're going to open an investigation, not like a legal investment, but they're going to have to open some kind of investigation on that based on that. And that's going to bring more things into discovery, which is going to get the league in more trouble. If we found out anything about the NFL over the last couple of years, they do not want things going to discovery, right? Like that's not what the NFL wants at all. It's been bad for the league. They're going to try to avoid that. So the NFLPA has, I would say, a significant amount of leverage here to defend Watson from the NFL's ruling here. And that is why a lot of people still feel like it's likely that this is not going to be some unprecedented suspension, and why even the NFL is not coming out and saying this is going to be a unprecedented suspension. Again, a year for what Watson has been accused of would be unprecedented. They've never done something like that for what Watson's done for. For gambling, they've done a year. And that's been recorded that they will do a year. For drugs, they've done a year. But for what Watson's accused of, and again, it's important to note that with the gambling case, they've proved that Calvin Ridley gambled. With the drug testing, right? They can prove that you broke the policy. With this, they're going under an assumption of somewhat that they believe you broke the policy. And taking away a full year because they believe you broke the policy is different than taking away the full year because they know you broke the policy, no matter how strong that belief might be. So that's why it would be unprecedented that they would go a year or year or two. And if they were thinking like that in the league office, that would be the word being used. And again, the reason why the NFLPA is going to fight this very hard, by the way, is not just for Deshaun Watson, but if you're the NFLPA, you can't have the NFL taking years from your players in your union because they believe you might have broken the personal conduct policy. You have to set that in stone right now, that you cannot allow that to happen if you're the Players Association, because it's one thing if they catch you breaking the policy and take a year, right? What Calvin Ridley did, he got caught. There's proof. What Josh Gordon, right, when he got the year suspended, he got caught multiple times. There was proof. There were drug tests, hard evidence. What they don't have in this case and what they won't have for a lot of cases is hard evidence. And the NFL is going to try to suspend based off of that, which, that's their right. But the NFLPA, it's also their right to say, hey, you can't prove it. That means you can't be out here taking years from a player if it's not something that you could prove was a true break of your personal conduct policy. You believe he broke the personal conduct policy. You can't prove it, which the NFLPA is going to fight that ruling, because you don't want players getting suspended for long term because especially if you're the union, because the NFL thinks that they did something wrong, because you can see the slippery slope that can become, because it might seem justified in this case to a lot of people if Deshaun Watson gets suspended for a year. But other cases will pop up where a suspension will be handed out because they think somebody did something, and it might not end up being justified. And if the NFLPA allows that to happen here, they're going to allow that to happen there. So that's what the fight is, right? I think sometimes people don't understand why unions fight these fights. That's why they do that. And that's what they're going to go off of, right? You have to make that argument if you're the NFLPA. And that's why I think a lot of people who are close to this, who actually have sources, I've seen a lot of people with fake sources about this over the last 3 months, are still saying it's going to be 6 to 8 games. That's probably what it's looking like. I would say probably 10. I think it's going to be 10. Now, there's a whole nother discussion to be had about how many games would derail the Browns season. That's another video for another day. But that's the latest on this Deshaun Watson situation. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let's keep it respectful. But y'all have a great day. Have a good night.